I pulled a little bit of discussion about Ellsworth Toohey, who's effectively the villain of the Fountainhead, because one of the things that comes up also a lot in Ayn Rand is that to be selfless is a vice and not a virtue. To be altruistic is used as a pejorative constantly in Ayn Rand's literature. Which is weird if you're talking about objectivity, because just a few months ago I actually did that. I mean, you know, if you're the scientific type who's into evolution, a few months ago I did a show about altruism where I talked a lot about game theory and demonstrated that yes, in fact, altruistic behavior is something that naturally arises out of competitive drive to propagate the species. And you can go back and listen to that in the archive if you're interested. But anyway, because it's so awful to be altruistic in the Ayn Rand universe, here's a description of Ellsworth Toohey from something that's linked on the blog. This guy writes, "The one bad lapse in the long speech in which Ellsworth Toohey lays bare his own motives." This is where he's doing his mwahaha, I'm really a villain all along. Let's see, Rand had put herself in an impossible position with her ethical theory. For Ayn Rand, a villain must be a completely self-sacrificing person. Toohey is an intelligent villain who wants power. And throughout the book, as a side note, you know, he's always talking about how wonderful it is to put people on welfare and to you know, be selfless and live for others, and it's the highest virtue, you know, so he's a real bad guy. Toohey is an intelligent villain who wants power, but somehow it has to come across that in wanting power he's not being selfish, because that would be virtuous. If Toohey had been dedicated to a mistaken ideal based on the theory that everyone would be happier in a world of self-sacrifice, it would be convincing, but then we would have no reason to hate him. If Toohey had known that universal self-sacrifice would lead to universal misery, but wanted it for the selfish motive of getting power for himself, this would be detestable, but then it would be dangerous to Rand's egoistic message. So Toohey has to want to